Now that were mixins, a very useful mechanism for sharing data and functionality across components, either across all components with global mixins or across a few selected components by manually adding mixins to components. But mixins have some drawbacks, or at least one possibly bigger drawback. If you build bigger applications, far bigger than this demo here, and you're maybe also working in a team, mixins can make it harder to understand your code, your component structure, because it's not always obvious where some value is coming from. In our alert mixin, we got the show alert and hide alert methods. In our delete user component, we don't have these methods. Of course, because they are in the mixin. But we are calling them from inside our template. Now, the problem with that is that here in this simple demo, for us, since we're the only developer who worked on this code, it's obvious where this is coming from. But think about bigger projects, where one component maybe is not just using one, but let's say 5 or 6 mixins. And you're maybe also working in a team with many developers working on the code base. Then it's not always as obvious where something is coming from. If show alert is coming from the alert mixin or maybe from the error handling mixin, which you also might have. And that can be a problem. With mixins, bigger projects, bigger code bases can be harder to manage. In addition, you have to take care about this merging behavior. And in case you have a scenario where the default merging strategies don't fit you, yes, you can override them, but that's a lot of extra care you have to take to ensure that mixins work correctly. And even if they do, you still are left with the problem of not immediately seeing where some method or where some data piece is coming from. That might not be a problem for you, especially in smaller projects or if you're working on your own. But as I said, in bigger projects, it could be a problem, and that's why Vue.js has a solution for that, and why Vue.js actually has an entire alternative way for you to write your components. Instead of setting up data, methods, computed, and watchers as you learned it throughout the course, Vue offers an alternative way, the composition API, which I already covered in the previous course module. And you might remember that in that last module, I already mentioned one possible downside you might face in bigger Vue apps when using the options API. So the way of building components with data, methods, computed, and watch, which we used in the majority of this course. It's a great way, but reusing logic can be tricky or cumbersome, because we use mixins for reusing logic when using that options API, and for the reasons I just mentioned, that can be problematic in bigger apps. And with the composition API, we have a nicer way of reusing logic across components. Because whilst we have mixins for sharing logic in the options API, we have custom composition functions when working with the composition API. So let's see how that would work.